5 years ago, on the day before I was planning to propose to my boyfriend, he vanished without a trace. I was 24 at the time, and we had been together since our senior year of high school, so our relationship had lasted for almost 6 years. I thought we were happy, and I was ready to take the next step and ask him to marry me. But everything changed when, on the night before my birthday, he didn't come home as planned. He told me he would be late after work, but when I waited all night, there was no sign of him. He didn't answer my calls or texts, and it wasn't long before I realized he was completely unreachable. I was devastated. I tried reaching out to his friends and family, but everyone blocked me, and I was left with no answers. My attempts to find him on social media were fruitless, and I eventually gave up, accepting that he had disappeared without any explanation. For months, I obsessed over what could have happened, wondering if I had done something wrong or if there had been some hidden issue between us that I missed. I even considered filing a missing persons report, but deep down, I knew he wasn't missing. He had chosen to leave, and for whatever reason, he didn't want me to find him. Despite everything, I never truly moved on. I dated a few men in the years after, but every time I tried to build a connection with someone, I found myself thinking about my ex, comparing them to him, or hoping that one day he might return. Eventually, I stopped trying altogether. My life was stuck in this painful limbo, waiting for answers that never came. Therapy helped me cope with the pain, but it couldn't erase the feeling that something wasn't right. Then, 2 weeks ago, I overheard a conversation that would change everything. My sister, who is 33, had come back from Canada where she had lived for years. She returned because our father, who is now 62, was seriously ill, and she decided to stay to help care for him. One afternoon, I went to my dad's house to drop off some soup for my mom. I had a spare key, so I let myself in and quietly approached his room, intending to check on him. But just as I was about to knock, I froze. I could hear my dad and sister talking about someone I hadn't heard mentioned in a long time, my ex. My ex had a very unique name, so I was certain it was him they were talking about. My dad asked my sister when she was planning to bring them down, saying he wanted to see them before he got too sick to travel. My sister replied that they were trying to figure out a way to bring them without me finding out, saying it was too risky for me to know. I stood there, shocked, trying to process what I was hearing. My ex, who had disappeared without a word, was still in contact with my family, and my sister was somehow involved. After leaving my dad's house in a daze, I decided to dig deeper. I logged into one of the fake social media accounts I had created years ago to search for him. This time, I searched for my sister's nickname instead of her real name, as I had never thought to look for her before. To my surprise, I found her Instagram account. It was public, and I scrolled through it, my heart pounding. What I saw made my world crumble. There were photos of my sister with my ex, smiling, happy, and even with a child who looked unmistakably like him. The boy had my ex's face, except for the eyes, which were clearly my sister's. I sat there, crying for what felt like an eternity, as the reality of what had happened sank in. My ex hadn't disappeared. He had left me for my sister. And for 5 years, my own family had helped cover it up, lying to me, comforting me as I grieved for a man they knew was alive and well, living a new life with my sister and their child. The betrayal was unbearable. My family, the people I trusted most, had kept this enormous secret from me for 5 long years, letting me live in confusion and heartbreak. Now I was left with so many unanswered questions about why he left, why they never told me, and what I was supposed to do with the shattered pieces of my life. In the early days of my heartbreak, I discovered that my family knew the truth all along, but chose to keep me in the dark, which made me sick to my core. I couldn't believe the betrayal, especially from my sister, who had the audacity to steal the life that should have been mine, and then come back year after year pretending to be my friend. I was utterly disgusted. I felt the urge to cut them all out of my life, to erase them completely. But before doing so, I wanted them to know that I was aware of their betrayal. I wasn't going to just disappear like my ex had. I needed to let them feel the weight of what they had done to me. I decided to leave them all a message, something simple, yet enough to let them know I knew. I sent the same line to my family and my ex. I know what you did, and all I want to know is why. That's all I asked because, more than anything, I wanted an explanation. These people were supposed to be my family, my home, the ones who would support me through the worst of times. Instead, they chose to hide things, to lie to me and turn me into a fool. I had believed that sending the message would bring me some peace, some sense of justice. But once I hit send, the emptiness remained. After that, I couldn't bear the weight of it all. I called up a few old friends from high school, and we headed to a nearby bar. I drank so much that night, I had to be carried home. It wasn't just the alcohol. It was the overwhelming pain and betrayal. 5 years had passed, and no one in my life thought I deserved the truth. No one thought I was worthy of an explanation or at least some closure. The agony gnawed at me, driving me to the brink of madness. I couldn't bring myself to check the responses from my family. I didn't even open their messages. I had also messaged my ex through an account I found. He had been using a different name, one that I ironically had come up with years ago when we first started dating. He hated the nickname back then, so I stopped using it. It never even crossed my mind to search for him under that name. But when I did, I found him. I sent him the same message, asking for an explanation, and waited. Days passed, and then yesterday, he finally responded. His message was long, 2 paragraphs, explaining that he was now married and had a child. He told me that contacting him was inappropriate and that neither he nor my sister owed me anything. He said that if I couldn't move on after 5 years, then maybe I was the problem. He called me a creep for texting him and said there was something wrong with me if I was still hung up on him. I was stunned. I hadn't expected him to react this way. All I wanted was an answer, some closure, but instead, he belittled me. I was left wondering if I had been wrong to ask him why he had left me for my sister without a word, rather than just ending things like a decent person would. The rest of my family kept trying to contact me, but I ignored their calls. I had already lost all the mutual friends we once shared. I felt completely alone. The more I thought about it, the more I regretted sending that message to my ex. Not because I didn't deserve an answer, but because I realized it was pointless. He was never going to give me what I needed. He had cheated on me with my sister after 6 years together, then disappeared without a word and started a family with her. That was the reality. I had to accept it, and no amount of asking why was going to change that. In a way, his response helped me realize that he wasn't worth the pain I had been holding on to. The problem wasn't with me. It was with him. I had given my all to that relationship, and he had chosen my sister. The loss wasn't just him. I had lost my family too. For 5 years, they had continued to betray me daily, and the emotional toll was immense. I felt like a wreck, struggling to make sense of it all. Even my therapist was shocked when I told her what had happened. I still haven't opened any of my family's messages. I don't see the point. There's nothing they could say to make things right. Not anymore. I know my father is sick, but after what they did, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to forgive him or any of them. Right now, all I can do is try to move forward. Then, out of nowhere, my sister showed up at my house today. She wanted to have a civil discussion about everything that happened. I refused to let her in, and she stood outside, calling me immature for not talking to her. It had been 3 weeks since I overheard my father and sister talking, and I found out the truth. Since then, they'd all been texting me, trying to get me to respond, but I ignored every single message. I didn't understand why they were so desperate now. After all this time, my family had made it clear they cared more about my sister than me. If that wasn't true, they would have been honest with me from the start. Now, after everything, they acted like they wanted to make amends. My sister tried to justify it, saying she and my ex had fallen in love during one of her visits home, that they tried to stay apart but couldn't. So they ran away together. Apparently, my parents kept it a secret to protect me. but I can't find it in myself to care about their reasons anymore. They chose to betray me, and there's nothing they can say to change that. You feel deeply betrayed by your family. The plan they had was that they would only inform you about your sister's affair with your boyfriend once you had found someone new in your life, supposedly to provide emotional support. However, you think this approach was completely misguided and dishonest. Instead of being upfront with you from the beginning, they were willing to let you live in ignorance for years. The thought of being in a new relationship and then suddenly finding out about this betrayal fills you with frustration, as it would have certainly destroyed any new relationship you might have formed. Reflecting on the fact that you hadn't found anyone over the past 5 years, you're relieved you discovered the truth on your own. You didn't have to learn about it through them, which could have made things even more painful. But after keeping quiet for so long, you reached your limit during an argument with your sister. You snapped at her, telling her to leave or you'd call the police. This upset her too, as she had been trying for nearly half an hour to convince you to talk to her, even though it was clear she was only doing so because of your father's declining health. She implied that if your dad weren't sick, she wouldn't have bothered to come. It seemed to you that she didn't genuinely care about you, only about your father's well-being. She eventually left after a tense exchange, but not before telling you that she didn't care if you ever spoke to her again, claiming she was only there for your father. She also mentioned that if it weren't for him, she would have flown her husband and daughter in just to flaunt her life in front of you. This taunt infuriated you, but you managed to restrain yourself from reacting violently, despite how tempting it was. After she left, you tried to distract yourself by watching Netflix, but you couldn't shake the anger and frustration from your mind, especially the cruel behavior your family had shown. They not only lied, cheated, and betrayed you, but now your father showed up at your door, seemingly just to mock your pain. The situation with your father leaves you conflicted. You care about his health and don't want it to worsen, but the betrayal still stings deeply. You're worried that if his condition gets worse, the rest of your family will blame you for not making amends. As much as you want to avoid them, you've considered visiting your father when your sister and mother aren't around, just to avoid further guilt. In an update, you mentioned that you eventually did meet your father and spoke to him. Surprisingly, you feel some relief after the conversation. You convince him to promise that both he and your mother would revise their wills to leave most of their assets to you. This decision came after you pushed hard, making it clear that if they didn't agree to this, you would cut off contact entirely. You're aware that if they left everything to you, your sister could contest the will, so you're making sure she gets as little as possible. Your father agreed to your demands, and now a family lawyer is coming over to oversee the rewriting of the wills. You plan to keep this a secret from your sister, allowing her to feel the same betrayal you experienced when your family covered up her affair with your boyfriend. You realize that this plan is manipulative and cruel, but you feel justified given how they hurt you without sparing your feelings. This whole experience has left you hardened and determined not to show kindness or compassion to those who hurt you. It's significant because my parents are relatively well off, and we're talking about a considerable amount of money here. I finally feel like I've gotten my revenge in a way. Some people say living well is the best revenge, but to me, this comes pretty close. Yesterday, when I met my father, I wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't have a plan in mind, and I was skeptical about what might happen. Fortunately, my sister and mother weren't home, so it was just the two of us. As soon as I entered the house, my father broke down in tears, hugging me tightly and apologizing. He kept saying how much he regretted his actions, but strangely, none of it held any meaning for me. I felt nothing, empty and numb. Even as he cried, I found myself comforting him out of habit rather than out of love. Then he confessed something that I didn't see coming. He and my mother had known about my ex's affair with my sister all along. They had caught them together one night in her room when she was visiting. This happened while I was still in the other room, completely unaware. At that point, my ex and I had been together for almost 4 years, so this incident had occurred 2 years before they eloped. My sister had begged my parents to keep it quiet, and they did because they believed the two were in love. They had all intended to tell me, but the timing never seemed right, or so they said. The real betrayal came when I informed my parents that I was planning to propose to my boyfriend, rather than supporting me. They told my sister, who then arranged for my boyfriend to leave the country. They booked him a flight to Canada just to avoid the proposal, all while I was left searching for him, confused and heartbroken. My parents went as far as warning friends, relatives, and anyone who might talk to me to stay silent about his whereabouts. That was how they ensured I never found out the truth. In hindsight, I have to admit my family was incredibly skilled at acting. They played the role of the perfect parents, comforting me day and night, pretending to be there for me, while they were actually supporting my sister's relationship with my ex behind my back. They attended my sister's wedding and baby shower, and whenever they went on vacations, it was actually to visit my sister and my ex. To maintain the charade, they would even Photoshop themselves into other locations just to deceive me. The lengths they went to were insane. As my father was telling me all of this, his intention was clearly to seek my forgiveness. But instead of bringing me peace, his confession only made me more frustrated and outraged. So, I gave him a piece of my mind, expressing how deeply betrayed I felt. Then, on a whim, I told him that if he truly wanted to make amends, he could change his will. It wasn't something I had planned to say, but it just came to me in the moment as he talked about their secret lives. If I couldn't have the emotional support system I deserved, then at the very least, I could demand monetary compensation. And that's exactly what I did. Soon enough, I'll be entitled to 90% of my parents' estate, and my sister will end up with nothing. Of course, I still plan on cutting her out of my life entirely, and I made that clear to my father. The only reason I'm even willing to stay in touch with him is because he's sick. He wasn't thrilled about it, but he should be grateful that I'm speaking to him at all after everything they've done. That being said, I might change my mind later. I'm not sure. What I do know is that my sister and my ex deserve each other, and I deserve better. I'm going to focus on finding that better life now. I don't need closure from either of them anymore. I'm done.